So, honestly, we woke up to some more good news today, and that is that finally, after asking for months for permission to be able to use long-range missiles into Russia, to be able to target more deeply into Russia, to get these drone launching sites, these missile launching strikes, these air bases. Finally, Biden has given permission. Finally. Now, of course, the danger becomes that, when Trump takes over, Trump rescinds that. And bear in mind, there are, if you look at some of the appointments that Trump is going for, like people like Tulsi Gabbard, uh, you know, I just don't even know. I just don't even know. But I worry. I really do worry. What is going to happen on this? But I hate the fact that we live in the world where Trump has said, "I can end this war in 24 hours." We now live in that reality. However, one thing I think that is and definitely should very often be addressed and brought up when we get good examples from this, and believe it or not, today we are going to the Express of all places. I know the Express, but as I've said before in the past, if someone does or says something good, then yes, congratulations. They should be, saying, good job for you for doing that. And this is a case where, believe it or not, I think the Express has done something really good because we have had sanctions and increasing sanctions on Russia since this war in Ukraine started. And you have heard the other side, like the anti-war side, constantly push back against this, that, oh, your sanctions aren't working, the Russian economy is growing like roaring like a Russian bear. Of course, that denies the economic reality. The reality is that Putin has had to basically try and prop up his economy any way he possibly can. And the only thing that is keeping the Russian economy going and even growing at this point is because it is a full, pretty much scale war economy. Everything is going towards the war. But with the Russian economy basically continuously being veiled because the Kremlin now only releases very select economic information to make it look good. Like, oh, don't worry, the economy's going great. Meanwhile, of course, that is not the reality on the ground, and especially not the reality on the ground being felt by average Russians, which today we are going to show you and talk about, to what I do agree with what the article describes this as, Putin's and Russia's economic nightmare that he is now having to face. And of course, Trump could come along and undo all these sanctions, which could destroy all this good work. Again, like I say, a disaster zone of what we could potentially see happening. But I think it's news reports and things like this that come out that do prove these pro-Russian lunatics wrong. That no, these sanctions have worked and are doing its job. So we're going to get into this today. And like I say, from the Express, and I know, but hey, good on them for doing this, because they are the only UK newspaper at the moment that is reporting on this. And I think this is something that should be reported on to show, hey, look, these sanctions are working. And unfortunately, that while there has been reporting on it, it hasn't really gone too much in the mainstream press. You've really had to go to some very niche outlets to try and get that information of what's really happening, of course, on the ground floor. So before we do go on into the rest of this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one foundation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's the Pony Club down below. So let's crack on then into this, like I say, coming from the Express of all places. But yeah, Russian President Vladimir Putin is facing an economic nightmare as the nation now struggles to continue to fund his war effort in Ukraine. Soaring food prices and now depleted war resources have now seen the Kremlin attempt to strike a balance, but to try to maintain the war machine in Ukraine and ensuring domestic stability. Currently, and this is where we get into some of the basic foodstuffs that Russians rely on. Currently, a kilogram of potatoes is at least 73% more expensive at the start of the year, when the price of butter has also increased by more than 30%, and according to data released by the Federal Statistics Service on Thursday. So bear in mind, and I wanted you to keep this in your mind, that we just had the US election. And one of the big things that won Trump that election was inflation. It was the price of inflation causing the rising cost of basic necessities for average, for your average, US citizen. How on earth does this then continue under Putin? Do the Russian people get so and more ticked off on this that their food shopping is rising in this way? A kilogram of potatoes 73% more expensive. Butter increased by 30%. That does not look good. Now, bear in mind, one of the other things to point out is that Russia will claim, and their Russian central bank will claim, inflation has had no impact. That somehow, even though inflation has had this big impact on every other country in the rest of the world, somehow inflation just has not affected Russia at all. But if that is apparently the case, explain those price freezes, those price increases. you know? So back to this. Russia has already, of course, been experiencing rising food prices, even, of course, before this year, as there's now a surge in Western sanctions, now including reduction on imports, that have now increased the price of all staple food items, including milk, bread, and fish. So again, more inflation on basic food items. Other areas have also been hit too, with a 64% rise in inflation. Again, we don't really know what inflation was. Like, the Russian central bank does not release inflation numbers anymore. But to have a 64% rise in inflation from what? We don't know. But we were already at least suspecting inflation was really affecting Russia. Mortgage rates have apparently risen by over 28%, and interest rate charges are reaching a record high of 21% just last month. Russian prosecutor and General Igor Kursevich has also ordered an investigation into these price increases and is pledged to try and provide a response to now placate this growing public disquiet. So they are angry and annoyed that, hey, you are, but these businesses are going to have to turn around and just go, it's inflation. It's your war that is causing this. It is these sanctions. And then people are going to say, well, why are these sanctions being put on? Is it worth the cost of these things? Because it should be made clear that regardless, as long as Russia keeps Ukrainian territory, we should say, we ain't removing these sanctions. Like, until you give back all the Ukrainian territory, which they had, sorry, those sanctions stay in place. I think regardless, that should be a key condition. Even if there is a peace agreement, until we have seen that Russia has fulfilled those requirements for that peace agreement, those sanctions aren't gone. Those should be used to force Russia to fulfill any of its goals or anything like that. So Deputy Prime Minister Dmitry Pashev has also now acted to try and demand a daily monitoring of the food market to measures to try and stabilize the situation. Additionally, the Kremlin has now recently adopted several policies to aim to try and cut Russian government spending on wounded Russian servicemen, combat infection, and of course to address long-term demographic problems such as low birth rates and labor shortages. So not only are hundreds of thousands of people being conscripted to go and fight in this meat grinder of a war, but if you get wounded, any of your future pension or anything like that is going to be cut. Gee, sounds sounds like that's going to have a really good effect on all those people. The cuts, which will obviously see the one-time payment made to those injured in combat now cut significantly, was met with anger by the mill bloggers online, with Putin eventually now compromising on the amount cut. We urge you we urge you, of course, to consent to ways to now improve our understanding. Oh no, hang on. So yes, here we are. So at the outbreak of the war, those injured in the combat service would receive, of course, £24,000, but this will now be cut to those of now with the most only severe of injuries, something of which mill bloggers claim is now becoming increasingly hard to have recognized by medical authorities. So there is now struggling on this. There is going to be a huge pushback on this, because there is a group called the Mothers of Russia, and this is a group of mothers who have had sons fight in military things, and this is a big, powerful lobby group on this. I cannot believe they are going to stay quiet on this, and if they start to speak out against Putin, start pushing back against this, Putin's going to find himself in a big, big problem. A big, big problem if they start talking about against this. So the Institute for the Study of War said that these financial incentives became a very key pillar of the Russian military recruitment campaign, and even personal retention efforts over the past nearly 3 years. And any reversal of such incentives indicates that the system is now becoming economically unstable for the Kremlin. So they cannot maintain keeping this level of intense combat and this level of pay, which eventually is going to lead to two things. Oh, you're being wounded? Guess what? Your medical claim being cut. Your medical claim ain't going to be recognized. What's that going to do to the morale? How long before we see genuine large-scale, desertions? Is that a possibility? Is that a reality? We know that there are small level happening, like a couple of people every so often, but now there's even less incentive to stay, and they don't want to fight in this meat grinder type of war. So how long do they stay in this? How long do they keep realizing, only to realize, oh, hang on a second, we've got all these guns. Why not just fight our way out? Because hey, better to try and fight your way to freedom than to fight into Ukraine where you might die and you ain't gonna get guaranteed freedom. So at the outset of the Ukraine war, these unprecedented levels of sanctions now placed led to many to hope that the Russian economy would be crippled, thus forcing them to now negotiate for either peace or just withdraw altogether. Of course, this is yet to happen, but with the Russian economy proving more durable than expected, thanks in large to, of course, Russian allies such as China and North Korea. Again, something that should be, I think, recognized. There is a point where we should be looking at, well, do we start to look at sanctioning Chinese companies that are involved in this? North Korea is already sanctioned to the hilt, but if you start to put some pressure, some economic pressure on China, start targeting companies that are doing business with Russia and say, you're still doing business with Russia, you're providing them more materials, we're going to sanction that specific company. China ain't going to like that. And it may even put more pressure on Russia to end this conflict, because it does not want its economy, which is still desperately trying to recover from COVID, to be damaged in any way, shape, or form. And yet they are terrified of this happening to them. Now, that could happen. But we'll see if we ever sort of get to that point. Starmer is meant to be having a meeting with Xi Jinping very soon. I don't know if they'll have a talk about that, but hey, it's a possibility that should be brought up, I think, if you are going to meet with China, saying, hey, stop supporting Russia. But of course, as this war now enters its winter of its third year, there is at least genuine hope amongst the Western economists that Russia's now financial woes are becoming more and more significant, to the extent that it could soon tangibly be seen on the country's war effort. So there is the reality of all those economic sanctions really kicking in. I mean, you see it there with the price of butter up 30%, potatoes, the inflation. I'm not 100% sure where you can sort of say that it got that inflation target from, because I'm following it now and it just goes to another Express page. So I think it has, do they say here? Food prices. So it's incited by the Business Insider. They're getting it from on this. Maybe it's come from the Business Insider where they're quoting that from. But again, if that is true, if inflation has raised by 64%, that is an insane number for it to be raised by. Mortgage rates are, of course, a key indicator there. If mortgage rates have gone up by 28%, and of course, loan recharges, like interest rates, reaching meant to be like 21%. So that is again all some very clear signs that the Russian economy is really starting to bite. These sanctions were, and you can tell now just from those things alone. Eventually, it will start having an impact. And I said it before, next year I think is going to be a big year for the conflict, a very big year. Unfortunately, Donald Trump is in charge. Oh, what he does there, we don't know. Unfortunately, we have to wait and see. But to have this be reported and to really be shown that, these Western sanctions are working and working quite in a significant way, I think is really good reporting by the Express. Good on them for citing this, for pushing this, because it doesn't get pushed enough that these sanctions are working, that they are having an impact, and eventually something could happen that could cause a very significant drop in somewhere. And it really does seem that they are almost at this tipping point where they cannot continue for too much longer, and we have to ensure that Ukraine can outlast them. Then that comes to supporting them with weapons, equipment, and this is potentially how Ukraine goes into a negotiating position, basically like we have the stronger negotiating hand than Russia, and we see what happens. But I do think next year is going to be a very big year for the war. What way, shape, or form, who knows? With Trump involved, that's for sure. But as always, like I say, thank you very much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe down below. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.